Before we begin, tell me, have you ever locked eyes with a stranger and felt something shift, even though you had no idea why? Tonight, I want to share a story. Not one that begins with fireworks, but with a woman who was late to a wedding, and a man who never believed in fate. Until that moment, he had money, power, and a world built on logic. She, just another face in the crowd. But when their eyes met, time didn't just stop. It rewrote everything. There's a reason you're here, listening now. Because some stories aren't coincidences. They're quiet echoes of something meant to be. So listen closely. This is the billionaire who waited for her. The rain had stopped just minutes before, but the courtyard of the Rothwell estate still shimmered with puddles and golden reflections. Guests in linen suits and pastel dresses strolled through the stone arches, murmuring about how the ceremony would begin. Any minute now. Eleanor James was not just late. She was dramatically, humiliatingly late. She burst through the estate gates, holding one broken heel in her hand, the other barely clinging to her foot. Her navy blue satin dress, meant to be timeless and graceful, was wrinkled, damp at the hem, and clinging in ways it absolutely should not. Her curls had turned frizzy from the drizzle, her eyeliner had smudged under pressure, and her nerves were unraveling with every step. And to make matters worse, her phone had died halfway through the taxi ride. The cab had stalled in traffic, and her only backup plan was to sprint the last 2 blocks in heels that clearly had a death wish. Of all the days to be a disaster, it had to be today. Her best friend, Lily's wedding. She rounded a marble hallway corner at full speed and slammed straight into someone very solid. A gasp escaped her lips as she stumbled backward. Her bare heel skidded on polished stone. She braced for impact with the floor, but it never came. An arm wrapped around her waist, steady, firm, holding her upright in one swift motion. She found herself pressed against a tailored tuxedo, the scent of crisp cologne and something woodsy, clean, sharp, and dangerously expensive, flooding her senses. Her palms, embarrassingly, were flat against his chest. God, I'm so sorry," she said, breathless, stepping back. Silence. Then a voice, low and composed. "Are you all right?" She looked up. Her breath caught. The man in front of her wasn't just handsome. That word didn't do him justice. He had the kind of face that made you forget how to think. Sharp jaw, midnight hair, and eyes like a winter storm. Gray, unreadable, intense. He looked like someone who never tripped, never flustered, never arrived late. And yet, here she was, in his arms. I'm fine," she stammered, cheeks blazing. "I was running late, and the back entrance, and my shoe broke, and—" "Breathe," he said, a trace of amusement behind the calm. She forced a shaky laugh. "Right, breathing." His eyes flicked down to her bare foot, and then back to her face. "You're lucky. The ceremony hasn't started yet." Eleanor blinked. "Wait, really?" He nodded. "Groomsmen are still taking photos in the courtyard. You've got maybe 2 minutes." She let out a sigh of relief. "You have no idea how much I needed to hear that." "I might," he said, stepping aside just enough to let her pass. "There's a side hallway that leads to the bridesmaid lineup. You won't draw attention." "Thank you," she said softly, adjusting the strap of her dress, "for catching me. And not, laughing." His lips curved, just barely, not quite a smile, but something close. "I don't usually catch people falling into me on wedding days," he said, "but you made it memorable." She laughed, nervously, lightly, then nodded and turned toward the hallway he'd indicated. Just before rounding the corner, something compelled her to glance back. He was still standing there, watching her, not with confusion, not with judgment, just watching. The ballroom was stunning. Cream drapery cascaded from high ceilings. Rows of guests stood, heads turned toward the doors, as soft piano music filled the air. Eleanor slipped quietly into place with the other bridesmaids, slipping her foot awkwardly back into her damaged heel. Her heart pounded like a drumline inside her chest. She'd made it, barely, but she had. And as Lily began walking down the aisle, radiant and tearful, Eleanor's eyes scanned the crowd. She hadn't meant to look for him, not really, but there he was, front row, seated beside the groom, still watching her. His gaze wasn't piercing, it wasn't aggressive, it was quiet, intent. Like he was studying her, calmly, as though he'd discovered something unexpected, and wasn't quite ready to let it go. She forced herself to face forward, to focus. But inside, something had shifted. Eleanor didn't believe in fate, or sparks, or any of those fairy tale things. But in that moment, as his eyes held hers across the room, she realized something she couldn't explain. This wasn't the last time she would see him. And deep down, she wasn't sure she wanted it to be. The reception sparkled under golden lights, laughter and music filling the conservatory like warm air. Eleanor stood by a floral arch, her champagne untouched, her thoughts fixed on the man in the black tuxedo. Blake. That was his name, Blake Remington. According to Lily, he was a tech billionaire and childhood friend of the groom, a man who usually avoided people and rarely spoke at all. And yet, he had caught her, looked at her, watched her, and now he was gone. Eleanor turned to leave the ballroom, needing air, needing space. Leaving already? His voice stopped her in her tracks. She turned to find him leaning against the hallway wall, tie loosened, drink in hand, unreadable gaze fixed on her. "I needed to breathe," she said. "So did I." A beat passed, and then, "You didn't apologize like you were afraid of me," he said. She raised a brow. "Should I have been?" "Most people are." Eleanor smiled, unsure why she suddenly felt calm. "You don't talk to many people, do you?" "Only when they don't try to impress me." He stepped closer. Not imposing, just near, like he was listening. "Why are you talking to me?" she asked quietly. Blake studied her. "Because you didn't pretend you weren't looking back." Their eyes held. The air between them thickened. She should have walked away, but she didn't. Not yet. The bar tucked into the side of the Rothwell estate was quiet, dimly lit with amber sconces and heavy velvet curtains that dampened the outside noise. Most guests hadn't even noticed it was open, but Blake led Eleanor there without hesitation, like it had always been the next step. No words were exchanged as they entered, just a quiet understanding. Eleanor slid onto a leather stool at the end of the bar, the farthest corner from the doors, while Blake signaled the bartender with the ease of someone used to being obeyed without question. "White wine for her," he said. Eleanor turned. "How do you know I drink white? You looked at it 4 times tonight, never picked it up." His tone was neutral, almost clinical, but there was warmth beneath it, observation, not judgment. She blinked. "Are you always this tuned in?" "Only when something's worth paying attention to." That silenced her for a moment. She looked down at the glass now in front of her, the pale golden liquid catching light like jewelry. "This feels strange," she said finally. "What does?" "Sitting here, talking to someone I literally crashed into an hour ago." Blake studied her. "Strange isn't always bad." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "And you don't think this is dangerous?" A corner of his mouth lifted. "I know it is." She tilted her head, intrigued. "Why are you talking to me then?" His gaze didn't waver. "Because I don't get stopped often. And you," he paused, not dramatically, but carefully. Like he meant what came next. "You stopped me, without even knowing it." The words hung between them like smoke. Eleanor sipped her wine, just to ground herself. The citrus bite cleared her thoughts, but not the heat in her chest. "That's a line," she murmured. Blake leaned in slightly, elbows on the counter. "It's the truth." She looked at him then, not just his face, but how he carried himself. Calm, still. The kind of stillness that didn't need approval, that came from knowing exactly who he was and how people usually reacted to him, which, apparently, wasn't like this. "You're not what I expected," she said after a beat. "And what did you expect?" he asked. She gave a half smile. Someone colder, maybe more arrogant, definitely less quiet. He exhaled a soft laugh. "Most people want noise. I prefer silence. And yet you're talking to me." "I don't mind this kind of noise," he replied. She stared into her glass, heart tapping a little harder. "Still," she said quietly, This feels like something I should walk away from. Blake didn't react at first. Then he said, "Then why haven't you?" She looked up. Their eyes met. The air between them shifted, just slightly, but enough. "I don't know," she admitted. "Neither do I." There was something terrifying about how calmly he said that, as if he didn't need to chase anything, as if he'd already accepted this moment for what it was. "You don't even know me," she said. "I've read less and understood more." "That's poetic," she said, voice tight. "It's also true." Eleanor forced a smile, trying to break the weight of the moment. "Do you always talk like that? Or is this your billionaire charm kicking in?" "I'm not charming," he said. She laughed, genuinely this time. "No, you're really not." "Good." They sat in silence for a moment, and for the first time, it wasn't uncomfortable. It was charged, like a conversation was happening without words. Then Blake said, softer now, "Do you believe in instinct?" Eleanor frowned slightly. "Depends. What kind?" "The kind that tells you something matters before you can explain why." She hesitated. "I believe in reading people, in patterns, in moments. But feelings can lie." Blake nodded slowly. "They can, but they don't always." She shifted slightly on her stool. "So what does your instinct tell you right now?" He didn't answer right away, just stared at her like he was still figuring it out. Then he said, "That you're not here by accident, and neither am I." That landed heavy. He didn't mean the wedding. He meant this moment, here, now. She swallowed. Her throat felt dry despite the wine. "What do you want from me?" His expression didn't change, but his voice dropped, lower than before. "Nothing you're not willing to give." The way he said it made her chest tighten. Not with fear, with something deeper. Recognition, maybe, that this wasn't casual, that it could never be. "I don't know what this is," she said honestly. "Neither do I," he replied, and for some reason, that made her feel safer than any practice line ever could. The music from the ballroom drifted in faintly now, soft jazz with laughter woven between the notes. Eleanor looked down at her hands. "I don't trust easily." "I don't ask for trust," Blake said. "I ask for honesty." She turned to him slowly. "And are you being honest right now?" He nodded once. "More than I've been in years." Their eyes held. The silence returned. But this time, it didn't feel like the end of the conversation. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them had a name for yet. Morning after the reception, the city felt different to Eleanor, as if the air had a new weight, as if sound carried with a slightly sharper edge. She woke with the memory of the night folded under her skin, the way Blake's gaze had slowed time, the way he'd said things that weren't promises, and yet made the ordinary feel like an unraveling. She dressed in the practiced armor of Eleanor James, associate architect at Linden & Reed, trading the navy silk of a wedding for crisp ivory blouse and tailored charcoal trousers. Her reflection in the elevator mirrored competence, the kind she'd built meticulously after years of proving she belonged. Underneath, something raw and unfamiliar pulsed, an echo of the conversation in the dim bar, the thing she had no name for. The office smelled like lemon disinfectant and ambition. Phones chimed. The hum of design software filled cubicles with soft mechanical whispers, and foam models littered the central table, their skeletal frameworks casting geometric shadows. Eleanor moved through it all with the easy nods of someone who had lived in this rhythm for years. She had a presentation today, the preliminary layout for the Southgate Tower lobby. Her brain had been buried in light studies, foot traffic flow, and the subtle tension between transparency and privacy for weeks. She stopped dead in the hallway. He was there. Blake Remington stood at the far end of the glass conference room, his back turned, looking out over the city like it was a chessboard, and he was calculating 3 moves ahead. No entourage, no flash. A gray suit that fitted the way a second skin did when it was tailored to expectations. The jacket was unbuttoned, his tie loosened just enough to signal he wasn't here to perform for show. He was reading something, papers held between one hand and the other, the corners of a slim folder barely visible beneath his fingertips. He didn't look surprised when she stopped. She felt, instead, a controlled pull, as if her presence had been accounted for. Even before he turned, before his eyes met hers across the span of glass, something in her tightened and then softened. "Eleanor," he said, without ceremony. His voice traveled through the open doorway like a quiet announcement. "Morning." She swallowed. "Morning." Greg, the senior project director on the Southgate account, strode up behind her. "You've got Blake Remington on the other side," he said, unaware of the internal earthquake happening in the woman in front of him. "He's the new principal investor. I wanted to make sure you two met before we begin." Blake turned. His expression was composed, blank in the way of practice control. But when his gaze landed on her, the silence between them thickened. Not icy this time, layered. He inclined his head slightly. "Eleanor James," he said, his voice measured. "I've seen your layouts. Interesting use of vertical transparency." Heat crept into her cheeks, not from embarrassment, but from the way the acknowledgement landed. Neutral, technical, and yet weighted. Greg clapped his hands, oblivious to the undercurrent. "Perfect timing," he said, stepping aside. "We were just about to jump in. Blake, this is Eleanor. She's leading the design conceptualization for the lobby. Eleanor, Blake is the new lead on the funding side. He'll be tight with us for the next few quarters." Blake extended a hand. "Pleased to finally meet you in a context that doesn't involve spilled wine," he said, and the ghost of the previous night flickered, unseen, beneath the formal veneer. Eleanor took his hand lightly, almost reflexively, and felt the same controlled warmth, a solid steadiness, like his touch was a bass note under everything. "Likewise," she said. Greg already had the room set. Blueprints spread across the table, renders fanned like cards, laptops open and glowing. Blake slid into the seat near the head, not dominating the space, just occupying it with the ease of someone who knew the cost of silence. Eleanor settled into her place, her pulse quickening, not from nerves of a professional critique, but from the invisible tether of the look they shared. Something had changed between them. The bar where they had measured honesty had become a battlefield none of them wanted to name. "Let's get into it," Greg said. "Eleanor, take us through the flow sequence again. I want to make sure we've accounted for peak days, evening traffic, and the visual layering we talked about." Eleanor nodded, clicked on a remote, and the large screen shifted from the generic cover slide to the animated model she had refined. Rendered light cascaded across the screen in gradients, sunrise spilling through layered glass, silhouettes of guests moving along seamless curves, acoustic panels whispering no noise while absorbing chaos. Her voice moved easily, the rehearsed cadence meeting intuition. As the guest approaches from the plaza, they're directed through a semi-transparent canopy. "The first impression is openness," she said. But the layering of the glass and the stepped interior funnel the flow toward the registration area while minimizing visual clutter. The upper mezzanine overlooks the main lobby, allowing vertical interaction without noise bleed. The selection of materials uses sound-dampening veneer beneath suspended gardens to prevent echo during high occupancy. Blake's gaze didn't stray from her. He didn't interrupt. He didn't nod excessively in performative agreement. He listened like a man cataloging, sizing, evaluating, feeling the friction between what was proposed and what would hold. When she finished, there was a small pause. Then, without fanfare, he leaned slightly forward. "What's the contingency for a sudden influx from the east entrance?" he asked. The question was precise, not a challenge in tone, but in intent. Eleanor blinked. "We've allocated overflow along the secondary terrace with retractable sightlines. It's in the simulations. Note the pressure gradients and the secondary routing." She tapped to bring the graphical overlay. "Here." The acoustic buffer is activated as needed, and the visual flow redirects to the central hall without making the arrival feel secondary. He didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Show me the numbers on the rerouting time during sunset, and how the light plays off the gradient panels when that redirection happens. If the visual weight drops, people perceive chaos. I want to see how it holds up if the primary path is clogged." She felt something shift below that precision. He wasn't questioning her ability. He was refusing to let assumption do the work for them both. He was not just inserting himself. He was making her defend, refine, elevate. It was a dance with no rhythm she'd anticipated, and yet she didn't pull back. Greg watched, eyes flicking between them, like he was watching two currents converge and hold tension without destroying each other. "Good point," he said. "Eleanor, get those simulations up. Blake, I'll have the analytics team pull the real-time adaptive overlay for the evening model." Blake gave a small nod. "We'll need to rerun the acoustic assumptions if the overflow patterns extend more than 20% beyond estimates. I don't want the layered gardens to become sound traps." She countersigned silently with a controlled breath, already pulling mental threads, recalculating possibilities. He was pushing, not out of ego, not to dismantle, but to sharpen and clarify. The friction between design intent and investor outcome was no longer a threat. It was something else, something that fit. After the meeting, people dispersed. Greg stayed to talk about logistics. Blake lingered in the room like a shadow that didn't leave, as if waiting to see what would happen when the space cleared. Eleanor packed her notes, rehearsing the calm exterior like armor. Blake remained by the window, hands in his pockets, watching the city move like a man looking at the future he'd already imagined. "You gave them a lot to think about," he said quietly. His voice had dropped to the low kind that carried through without making a ripple. "You gave me something to respond to," she replied. He turned slightly, his expression unreadable. "You handled it well. I could have asked the same questions in the margins, made suggestions later. Instead, I put them on the table. I prefer things up front," she said. "No surprises." "Good," he said, "because I don't like the kind that hides behind compliments." She studied him. "Why are you here, Blake? Really? Not just the investor part." He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at her with something that wasn't evaluation, wasn't stakeholding, wasn't the cold distance of a boardroom. It was residue from the night before, a softness at the edge of something composed. "Because I want to know," he said, "if the moment we had, if the thing that wasn't named, was real beyond wine and quiet rooms." Her throat tightened. "And how do we measure that?" she asked. That was the safe question. Professional. Distant. "By watching how two people sit in the same room and don't pretend they don't feel the shift," he replied. "By seeing if honesty holds when expectation wants to pull both of us apart." She didn't have a ready answer. She had deadlines. She had deliverables. She had a carefully curated life that didn't leave much room for untagged currents. But she also had the memory of being seen, not through a lens of utility or conquest, but as someone who had a gravity he hadn't planned for. "I need to get back to the simulation," she said. "We'll talk more when the numbers are in." He inclined his head. "I'll expect refinement. I won't accept complacency." Her pulse stuttered. "You're not the only one who hates that word." He gave a brief, almost imperceptible smile, one she hadn't seen in the public face. Then he left. Eleanor sat back in her chair, the hum of the empty conference room echoing in a different way now. He had not offered comfort. He had not demanded anything. He had taken the space between them and breathed into it a question that required more than a one-word answer. She opened her laptop. The simulations loaded. She began again. That evening, back at her apartment, Eleanor replayed the day quietly. The meeting had been professional, efficient, textbook. But the undercurrent between her and Blake was not textbook. It was something that chipped at certainty, like small fissures appearing in a foundation that had always seemed solid. She hadn't expected him to show up in her world like that, a stranger who became presence, an influence who didn't overstep, but recalibrated, a man who had taken a night of unspoken honesty and turned it into a question sitting across a glass table, asking, without asking, whether they both felt what was real. Her phone buzzed. A message from Lily. "You okay? You looked like you were in a standoff. Did he say anything that made you lose your color?" She stared at the text, thumb hovering. "He's here," she wrote back. "He asked the right questions." She didn't say any more, because the truth was more complicated than a quick reply could hold. She pressed send. She didn't know what the next move was. But somewhere beneath the spreadsheets and the deadlines, the thing between them was expanding, not in words, but in the spaces they kept from speaking out loud. Rain tapped lightly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Eleanor's apartment as she stood barefoot in her kitchen, the city stretched in blurred lights behind her. The day had passed in a blur of meetings, revisions, and polite praise from the team. But none of it stayed with her. Only one thing had: Blake. He hadn't said much after the meeting, but the space between them had said enough. Her phone buzzed again. Blake Remington. "I'll be at the Redstone rooftop tomorrow night, 8 p.m. Come if you want to talk without blueprints between us. No emojis, no pressure. Just a sentence. Direct, controlled, and completely disarming." She read it 3 times. The Redstone, of course. One of the properties his company owned, a boutique hotel with a private rooftop that was always by reservation, always full of people who whispered in corners and made deals over whiskey. This wasn't a date. It wasn't casual. It was an invitation to stand in the open. To admit something was happening. Eleanor typed out a response. "I have a deadline tomorrow," then deleted it. Typed again. "I'll let you know." Deleted that too. Finally, she let the screen go dark and left the phone face down on the counter. She wasn't ready, and yet she wasn't sure she wanted to pretend anymore. The next evening, she stood in front of the rooftop doors of the Redstone, wind tugging gently at her coat, the city breathing below her. She hadn't told him she was coming. Maybe part of her wanted to see if he'd be there without confirmation. He was. Blake stood alone near the far edge, hands in the pockets of a dark coat, collar turned up slightly against the wind. He turned before she said anything, like he'd known she was already there. "Hi," she said softly, walking toward him. He looked at her, really looked, and something softened around his eyes. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I." She stood beside him, their shoulders almost touching as they both stared out at the skyline. For a while, they said nothing. Then he broke the silence. "What are you afraid of?" Eleanor blinked. "You don't waste time, do you?" "No," he said. "Time's the one thing I can't earn back." She folded her arms, partly for warmth, partly for protection. "I'm afraid this doesn't make sense. That I'm stepping into something that doesn't fit anywhere in my life." Blake didn't respond right away. "Do you need it to fit?" She hesitated. "I've spent years building a version of myself that finally feels stable. This," she gestured between them, "this isn't part of the plan. I don't want to break your plans," he said. "I just don't want to pretend I didn't meet someone who sees me when most people don't even try." The words hit harder than she expected. "You barely know me," she whispered. "I know how you think," he said. "I watched you explain your design like it was a living thing. I watched you let criticism shape your ideas without losing your voice. You lead without needing a spotlight. You care more about meaning than noise." Eleanor turned toward him slowly. "And you think that's enough?" she asked. "No," Blake said quietly. "But it's where something real can start." She took a step back, not out of fear, but to look at him. Really look. The man who had power, presence, resources, and yet had stood there, waiting without demand, offering honesty without pretense. "I don't want a story," she said. "I don't want a fairy tale with sharp teeth." He nodded. "Neither do I. I want truth, even if it's messy." The wind picked up. Somewhere below, a siren wailed and faded into the night. "I'm not easy," she said. "Good," he replied. "I'm not interested in easy." And in that silence that followed, heavy, fragile, sacred, something between them clicked into place. Not an answer, not certainty, but willingness. She exhaled. "So what now?" Blake turned toward her fully. "Now we stop pretending we don't feel it." A pause. "And we see where it leads." Eleanor stood in front of the mirror, fixing the collar of her blouse for the 3rd time. She'd been up since dawn, her inbox overflowing, her calendar booked solid. But it wasn't the work that had her nerves twitching. It was the meeting, not the one with her architecture team, the one with Blake. For the first time since that rooftop evening, he was coming to Horizon's office to discuss the next development phase of the Riverside project. On paper, it was strictly professional, but nothing about the air between them had ever stayed on paper. She told herself it would be fine. They had shared a moment, maybe more. But they were adults. They'd agreed to take it slowly. Honestly. Still, when she stepped into the conference room and saw him already seated at the table in a charcoal gray suit, eyes calm, she felt her composure flicker like a loose wire. "Good morning," he said evenly. "Morning," she replied, sitting across from him. They didn't smile. They didn't have to. Their silence was its own language. The meeting began. Her team walked through design elements. Blake nodded, asked precise questions, gave insightful input, but he never looked directly at her, until the final 10 minutes. "So," said one of the junior architects, "we've incorporated feedback from your lead advisor. She was very clear on your expectations." Eleanor frowned. "Advisor?" Blake glanced at the younger woman, then back at Eleanor. "Victoria Langston. She handles structural oversight for several of my investments." Eleanor's stomach turned cold. Victoria Langston, a name she hadn't heard in years, and one she had never expected to hear from his mouth. "She's working on this?" Eleanor asked. "Yes," Blake said. "She's been consulting on the financial side. Why?" The room went quiet. The team sensed the shift, but didn't know what it meant. Only Eleanor and Blake could feel what had changed. Eleanor forced a breath. "Victoria and I have history." Blake looked at her, his voice calm. "What kind of history?" "She was my mentor, briefly, until she decided I was competition." She hesitated. "She tried to block my promotion at my last firm. Spread lies." "Are you saying she was malicious?" he asked. "I'm saying she made it clear I wasn't welcome in any space she wanted to control." Blake's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, but he didn't immediately defend her either. The meeting adjourned. People filed out, leaving Eleanor and Blake alone in the glass-walled room. She turned to him. "You knew." "I didn't," he said. "Not about the past. I knew you were sharp around her name, but I didn't connect it." "You just happened to pick her out of everyone in Manhattan?" "She's efficient, and she's worked with me for years. This project has millions on the line." Eleanor crossed her arms. "So your instinct says I'm worth listening to, but your money still trusts her?" He exhaled slowly. "This isn't about trust." "It's exactly about trust," she said. His voice dropped, low and level. "Don't confuse caution with betrayal." She looked away. "It's hard not to." Silence stretched. "I'll review her involvement," Blake said. "No," Eleanor replied, quieter now. "I don't want to be the reason you change your business. I needed to know where I stand." He took a slow step toward her. "You stand where you've always stood, with more power than you realize." She didn't answer, and he didn't push. When she finally left the room, she felt both seen and invisible, like she mattered too much, and not enough. Because love, or whatever this was, wasn't supposed to come with ghosts that knew your name. Eleanor stood in front of the mirror, fixing the collar of her blouse for the third time. She'd been up since dawn, her inbox overflowing, her calendar booked solid. But it wasn't the work that had her nerves twitching. It was the meeting. Not the one with her architecture team. The one with Blake. For the first time since that rooftop evening, he was coming to Horizon's office to discuss the next development phase of the Riverside project. On paper, it was strictly professional, but nothing about the air between them had ever stayed on paper. She told herself it would be fine. They had shared a moment. Maybe more. But they were adults. They'd agreed to take it slowly. Honestly. Still, when she stepped into the conference room and saw him already seated at the table, in a charcoal gray suit, eyes calm, she felt her composure flicker like a loose wire. "Good morning," he said evenly. "Morning," she replied, sitting across from him. They didn't smile. They didn't have to. Their silence was its own language. The meeting began. Her team walked through design elements. Blake nodded, asked precise questions, gave insightful input, but he never looked directly at her, until the final 10 minutes. "So," said one of the junior architects, "we've incorporated feedback from your lead advisor. She was very clear on your expectations." Eleanor frowned. "Advisor?" Blake glanced at the younger woman, then back at Eleanor. "Victoria Langston. She handles structural oversight for several of my investments." Eleanor's stomach turned cold. Victoria Langston, a name she hadn't heard in years, and one she had never expected to hear from his mouth. She's working on this, Eleanor asked. Yes, Blake said. She's been consulting on the financial side. Why? The room went quiet. The team sensed the shift but didn't know what it meant. Only Eleanor and Blake could feel what had changed. Eleanor forced a breath. Victoria and I have history. Blake looked at her, his voice calm. What kind of history? She was my mentor, briefly, until she decided I was competition. She hesitated. She tried to block my promotion at my last firm. Spread lies. Are you saying she was malicious? He asked. I'm saying she made it clear I wasn't welcome in any space she wanted to control. Blake's jaw tightened. He didn't argue, but he didn't immediately defend her either. The meeting adjourned. People filed out, leaving Eleanor and Blake alone in the glass-walled room. She turned to him. You knew. I didn't, he said, not about the past. I knew you were sharp around her name, but I didn't connect it. You just happened to pick her out of everyone in Manhattan? She's efficient, and she's worked with me for years. This project has millions on the line. Eleanor crossed her arms. So your instinct says I'm worth listening to, but your money still trusts her? He exhaled slowly. This isn't about trust. It's exactly about trust, she said. His voice dropped, low and level. Don't confuse caution with betrayal. She looked away. It's hard not to. Silence stretched. I'll review her involvement, Blake said. No, Eleanor replied, quieter now. I don't want to be the reason you change your business. I needed to know where I stand. He took a slow step toward her. You stand where you've always stood, with more power than you realize. She didn't answer, and he didn't push. When she finally left the room, she felt both seen and invisible, like she mattered too much and not enough, because love, or whatever this was, wasn't supposed to come with ghosts that knew your name. The invitation arrived on a Thursday. Formal, thick cream paper, her name written in clean serif font. The Remington Foundation Annual Gala. The most public, high-profile event of Blake's calendar. Attended by billionaires, media moguls, fashion icons. The kind of night with cameras at every entrance and whispers following every detail. Eleanor stared at the envelope, unopened, as if it might detonate in her hand. It wasn't that she didn't expect it. After the rooftop, after the night at his penthouse, after the quiet truths exchanged in shadows. But she had never imagined this, being brought into his world so openly, so visibly. She texted Blake, Eleanor, are you sure you want me there? A pause, then, Blake, I've never been more sure of anything. She stared at the screen, then closed her eyes, and said yes. The gala was held at the glass atrium of the Bravestone Museum. Spotlights swept the sky. A string quartet played on a floating stage above a shallow, reflecting pool. It was surreal, breathtaking, terrifying. Eleanor stepped out of the car in a sleek black gown, minimal makeup, her hair swept into a low knot. Elegant, understated, but every step felt like it echoed. Cameras flashed, people turned, and then she saw him, Blake. He was waiting for her at the bottom of the steps, dressed in a black tuxedo, no tie, his posture effortlessly powerful. But when he looked at her, really looked, all of that fell away. For a moment, it wasn't a gala. It was just them. He offered his arm. She took it. And just like that, they walked inside together. The night unfolded in glittering waves. Introductions, champagne, soft music, elegant speeches. Blake didn't parade her. He didn't show her off. But he didn't let her disappear either. He stayed close. And when people asked who she was, he answered simply, she's with me. Not as a shield, not as a trophy, just truth. Eleanor smiled, nodded, answered politely. But inside, a battle raged. She didn't belong here. She didn't know the rules, the glances, the whispers. People noticed her, assessed her. Some smiled, some didn't. And then she saw her. Victoria Langston. Across the room, in an emerald gown, drink in hand, expression sharp and unreadable. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away. And Eleanor felt the familiar chill, the one that said, "You're not one of us. You never will be." She turned toward Blake, but he was already watching her. And when their eyes met, his expression shifted, gentle, steady, reassuring. Without a word, he stepped closer and placed his hand on her back. Not possessively, not for show, just presence. Solid, real. And in that moment, Eleanor realized something. No one could make her feel replaceable unless she let them. So she lifted her chin and stayed. The invitation arrived on a Thursday, formal, thick cream paper. Her name written in clean serif font. The Remington Foundation Annual Gala, the most public, high-profile event of Blake's calendar. Attended by billionaires, media moguls, fashion icons. The kind of night with cameras at every entrance and whispers following every detail. Eleanor stared at the envelope, unopened, as if it might detonate in her hand. It wasn't that she didn't expect it, after the rooftop, after the night at his penthouse, after the quiet truths exchanged in shadows. But she had never imagined this, being brought into his world so openly, so visibly. She texted Blake, "Eleanor, are you sure you want me there?" A pause. Then, "Blake, I've never been more sure of anything." She stared at the screen, then closed her eyes, and said yes. The gala was held at the glass atrium of the Bravestone Museum. Spotlights swept the sky. A string quartet played on a floating stage above a shallow reflecting pool. It was surreal, breathtaking, terrifying. Eleanor stepped out of the car in a sleek black gown, minimal makeup, her hair swept into a low knot, elegant, understated. But every step felt like it echoed. Cameras flashed, people turned, and then she saw him, Blake. He was waiting for her at the bottom of the steps, dressed in a black tuxedo, no tie, his posture effortlessly powerful. But when he looked at her, really looked, all of that fell away. For a moment, it wasn't a gala. It was just them. He offered his arm. She took it, and just like that, they walked inside together. The night unfolded in glittering waves, introductions, champagne, soft music, elegant speeches. Blake didn't parade her. He didn't show her off, but he didn't let her disappear either. He stayed close, and when people asked who she was, he answered simply, "She's with me." Not as a shield, not as a trophy, just truth. Eleanor smiled, nodded, answered politely, but inside, a battle raged. She didn't belong here. She didn't know the rules, the glances, the whispers. People noticed her, assessed her. Some smiled, some didn't. And then she saw her. Victoria Langston. Across the room, in an emerald gown, drink in hand, expression sharp and unreadable. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither looked away. And Eleanor felt the familiar chill, the one that said, "You're not one of us. You never will be." She turned toward Blake, but he was already watching her. And when their eyes met, his expression shifted, gentle, steady, reassuring. Without a word, he stepped closer and placed his hand on her back. Not possessively, not for show, just presence, solid, real. And in that moment, Eleanor realized something. No one could make her feel replaceable unless she let them. So she lifted her chin and stayed. The gala ended late, but neither of them seemed in a rush to leave. The car ride back to Blake's penthouse was quiet, city lights flashing against the windows, the weight of the night settling over them like a soft blanket. Eleanor sat beside him, hands in her lap, still wearing the gown, her heels resting on the floor between them. He hadn't said much since they stepped into the car, but something was shifting. She could feel it. When they reached his building, the elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than usual. The silence between them wasn't tense. It was thick with things unsaid. Once inside the penthouse, Blake poured 2 glasses of water instead of wine. He handed her one, then leaned against the counter, tie undone, jacket gone. Eleanor waited. He didn't speak at first. Then, finally, he said, "You handled yourself tonight." She tilted her head. "You sound surprised." "I'm not," he paused, "but I saw the moment you wanted to run." Eleanor looked down at her glass. "I almost did." He nodded, slowly. "I know the feeling." She raised her eyes to his. "Do you?" Blake hesitated, then set down his glass and walked to the window, staring out at the skyline. "I wasn't supposed to be the one in charge," he said quietly. She blinked. "Of your company? Of anything?" He turned slightly, still watching the city. "My older brother was the golden one, the heir, the one who charmed everyone. I was just the sharp one, the quiet one, the one who got sent away to boarding school because I wouldn't smile for the press." Eleanor stayed silent. "He died in a car accident when he was 27, Blake continued. "I was 23, still in grad school, still thinking I'd find a place that didn't require being looked at." His voice didn't shake, but something behind it did. "My parents didn't speak to me for 6 months after the funeral. Not because they blamed me, but because I was the only one left, and I wasn't him." Eleanor's chest tightened. "And suddenly," Blake said, "I was the one at every meeting, every fundraiser, every boardroom. I was the Remington legacy." He turned now, and everyone started pretending I'd always been that guy. She swallowed. "That's why you hate crowds." "I don't hate them," he said. "I just don't trust what they ask you to become." A beat of silence passed. "I didn't want to drag you into that world," he said, voice lower now. "But I also couldn't keep you in the shadows." Eleanor stepped toward him, slowly. "You didn't drag me. I walked in." His eyes met hers. "I'm not your brother," he said. "I'm not perfect, and I don't want you to fall for the version of me that people in rooms like that pretend to like." "I'm not here for that version," she said quietly. Blake looked at her like she'd just handed him a truth he didn't think he deserved, and maybe, for the first time, he believed it. Eleanor reached for his hand, and he let her hold it. Not tightly, not possessively. Just real. No noise, no mask. Just them. The next morning, the city awoke slowly beneath soft, gray skies. But in Blake's penthouse, Eleanor was already up, barefoot, standing by the window with coffee in hand, wrapped in one of his shirts. The skyline stretched endlessly before her, but her gaze wasn't on the buildings. It was on the reflection of him, standing behind her. He didn't speak, just walked up and stood beside her, quiet, present. After a while, she said, "I don't know where this goes." "I do," he replied. She turned slightly. His eyes were steady, sure. "Where?" she asked. He looked down for a moment, like he wanted to choose his words carefully. "Wherever you're ready to let it." Eleanor's chest rose with a silent breath. "You don't scare me," she said softly. "You overwhelm me." Blake smiled, just faintly. "You keep showing up anyway." "That's the terrifying part." A beat passed. Then, "Come with me this weekend," he said. "To the lake house." Eleanor blinked. "You have a lake house." "Two, technically, but one's quieter." She laughed, a short, surprise sound. "Of course it is." "No press, no events, no expectations. Just space, just us." "Us," she repeated, like it was still a new language. Blake leaned closer. "You don't owe me anything, Eleanor. Not a performance, not a version of yourself. Just your presence." She searched his face. "And what do you want from that?" His voice was low, steady. "Everything that comes with it." Her chest tightened, not with fear, but with recognition, because she wanted that too. But she was still afraid of falling, of being known, of what happens when someone sees every corner of you and stays. The lake house was still, nestled between pines and fog, no noise, no signals, just firewood and old furniture and an open deck that overlooked the water. Eleanor stood at the edge of the dock, wrapped in a knit sweater, hair tousled by wind. Blake joined her minutes later, holding 2 mugs of tea. She took hers. "So this is the part where I learn you're secretly a poet." "I don't write," he said. "I build," she smiled. "You build walls," he turned toward her. "Until now." They stood in silence. Then Eleanor asked, "Why me?" Blake didn't hesitate. "Because when I look at you, the noise stops." She stared at him, and in that moment, wind in her hair, no makeup, no city behind them, he saw her fully. And she let herself be seen, really seen. Not perfect, not polished, but present. And in return, he didn't flinch. didn't reach for her like she was a prize. He just held out his hand, and when she took it, there was no one else in the world. No ballroom, no whispers, no past. Just this, whatever this was. And for the first time in her life, she didn't want to run.